Unbelievable, for the lure of a multi-million-dollar insurance payout, a wife dared to end her husband's life in the most chilling way. Think about it. The person who lies beside you every night, who greets you with a smile in the morning and cooks your favorite meal, secretly plotting your destruction. All that affection was nothing but a mask for one goal. Money? Cold, calculated, merciless. This is the story of a wife who took her husband's life not out of heartbreak, not out of rage but out of sheer greed. And the way she executed her plan was nothing short of cunning. Her scheme was so carefully arranged that it left everyone stunned. How could someone betray the very person they vowed to love and protect? Let's peel back the layers of this dark, twisted story. That morning, December 12, 2023, in the upscale suburb of Brentwood, Los Angeles, the sky was heavy with winter rain. The streets glistened with water, the air carried the scent of wet grass and asphalt, and gray clouds loomed low. In this quiet, high-end neighborhood, everything seemed normal, on the surface. Luxury cars rolled past security gates, guards half asleep in their posts, and parents bustled about, preparing their children for school. No one had the slightest clue that tragedy had already struck one of the community's most respected homes. Behind the tall iron gates of a lavish Brentwood mansion, Detective Adam Knight, a veteran officer admired for his discipline and fairness, was found dead in his own bedroom. The news spread like wildfire. A man who had dedicated his career to justice was suddenly gone. An ambulance tore through the neighborhood, sirens screaming, its lights flashing across the slick pavement. Neighbors gathered at the front gate, whispering nervously. "I heard Detective Knight had a heart attack." "That can't be right, he just had a physical and he looked healthy." The air grew thick with unease and suspicion. Inside, Laura Williams, Adam's wife, sat on the sofa with a pale, trembling face. Her long hair clung messily to her shoulders, her eyes red but strangely dry, no tears flowed. A damp handkerchief twisted in her grip as she stammered to the medical team. "My husband, he didn't wake up this morning. I thought he was just exhausted," but her words cracked. Yet for some observers, her grief felt rehearsed, like a script rather than raw emotion. More alarming still, just one day earlier, Adam had signed a life insurance policy worth over $12 million. The sole beneficiary? Laura. To many, that coincidence was far too convenient. When investigators searched the bedroom, they found no sign of struggle. On the bedside table sat two curious items: a half-empty glass of Merlot and a cup of ginger tea, cooled and forgotten. Seemingly ordinary objects, but soon they would become the centerpiece of a far-reaching investigation. Outside, the drizzle continued. Mrs. Susan Lee, the neighbor across the street, stood under her umbrella and whispered, "Around 2 in the morning, I saw a man in a green raincoat slip through the side door. I thought he was family, but the timing was strange." What seemed like a small detail would later turn into a key puzzle piece. That rainy morning marked the beginning of a grim mystery. A decorated detective dead without warning, a beautiful but secretive wife, and an enormous insurance policy at the heart of it all. Behind the mansion walls, a sinister plan had already been set in motion. That same night, a storm pounded the city of San Diego. By dawn, water still dripped from rooftops in the upscale La Jolla neighborhood, where Adrian Scott's family home stood quiet. But the peace shattered as flashing lights from police cruisers and ambulances lit up the driveway. Investigator Brian Parker stepped out with a firm expression, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. The mingling scents of rain and hospital disinfectant filled the heavy air. Inside the master bedroom, the atmosphere was unsettling. Too neat. Too staged. Curtains hung half open, the bedside lamp still glowed, and on the nightstand rested that same strange pairing: cooled herbal tea and a half-full glass of red wine. Adrian's body lay stiff, lips blue, eyes half open as though trying to warn of the truth. A forensic officer leaned toward Brian and murmured, "Clear signs of poisoning, not natural causes." Laura sat pale on the sofa, clutching a handkerchief, her voice flat and strangely composed as she recounted, "This morning I tried to wake him, but he wouldn't move. I panicked and called 911. Brian studied her carefully. Her words flowed too smoothly, too rehearsed. His suspicion deepened. Outside, Mrs. Lee repeated her story to officers. "At 2 a.m., I saw a tall man in a dark jacket at their side entrance. The rain was pouring, so I assumed he was a worker, but now I'm not so sure." That testimony was passed to Brian. Checking the neighborhood's CCTV only frustrated him further. The storm blurred the footage beyond recognition. Still, he muttered, "Mrs. Lee's account is crucial." Back in the room, Brian zeroed in on the wineglass and teacup. He ordered forensic samples from both, every item carefully bagged as evidence. Laura sat unnervingly quiet, staring out the rain-streaked window. When Brian asked if they'd had visitors, she shook her head. No one. We just had dinner, some tea, and went to bed. The calmness in her tone only made his instincts scream louder. Every detail felt staged. The arranged pillows, the still glowing lamp, the curtains half open. Nothing added up. Outside, news crews arrived, flashing cameras across the mansion gates, while neighbors whispered in hushed tones. Murder, betrayal, conspiracy. Brian's gut told him one thing: this was no accident. Brian Parker replayed the grainy CCTV clip, showing a tall figure slipping through the backyard in the dead of night. Though blurred, the outline was unmistakable. Ryan Carter didn't bother to deny it. He simply shut his eyes for a brief moment, as if surrendering to the truth. You weren't alone that night. If you keep quiet, you'll end up carrying the blame. Tell me, who pulled you into this? Brian's voice was steady but sharp, the ticking clock amplifying the tension in the interrogation room. At last, Ryan whispered, I was just asked to help. You swore no one would be harmed. I never imagined it would end this way. Brian leaned forward, unflinching. Who asked you? Ryan buried his face in his hands before finally speaking the name that had been haunting investigators from the start. Laura Williams. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Brian forced himself to stay composed and pressed on with sharper questions. Ryan explained how Laura had summoned him to Adrian Scott's home before dawn. She had given him a small box filled with sleeping pills and ordered him to ensure Adrian consumed the tainted drink. At first, Ryan hesitated, but Laura promised him wealth and a fresh start. Why did you agree? Brian demanded. Ryan's voice cracked as his gaze fell to the floor. Years ago, I was close to her. She knew my weakness. I couldn't resist. She trapped me. Brian realized Laura had preyed on Ryan's emotions to manipulate him into becoming her accomplice. After the interrogation, Brian retreated to his office. One piece of the knot was untangled, but the entire web still loomed large. Laura was emerging as the orchestrator, yet the moves were too polished, too systematic for a lone spouse. That afternoon, a fresh report arrived from the financial division. Beyond the $500,000 Laura wired to Ryan, investigators discovered far greater sums transferred to Daniel Brooks, a former insurance employee from San Diego. The amount dwarfed Ryan's payoff, millions funneled directly into his accounts. Brian shut the folder decisively. Laura was only the surface. Daniel's name pointed to something far bigger, an organized network. Watching the fiery glow of sunset settle over the San Diego skyline, Brian muttered to himself, this fight has just begun. Even past 11 p.m., the precinct buzzed with urgency. In his office, Brian pored over thick stacks of documents. Daniel Brooks, late 30s, dismissed years ago for falsifying insurance records. Bank traces confirmed he had received millions from Laura only days before Adrian's death. Brian gave a direct order, dig into everything. His finances, calls, every meeting last week. I want no gaps. By morning, surveillance revealed Daniel wasn't living quietly at all. He had constructed a shadow empire, falsifying claims, laundering money, even trafficking drugs. He drove flashy sports cars, lived in a luxury high-rise, and flaunted wealth he couldn't legally earn. When police finally knocked, Daniel bolted for the balcony. But officers already surrounded the building. Within minutes, he was cuffed and escorted away. Unlike Ryan, Daniel walked into interrogation calm and upright, eyes sharp, lips curved into a smirk. I'm a consultant, he said coolly. People need their paperwork fixed. I deliver. They pay. Simple business. Brian's stare cut through the arrogance. You took millions from Laura Williams. What was it for? Daniel chuckled, leaning back in his chair. If I told you, I might not leave here alive. Believe me, detective, what you're seeing is only the surface. There are bigger players in this game. Silence fell. Brian knew instantly, Daniel wasn't a pawn. He was a strategist, skilled in hiding behind shadows. Attention turned back to Laura. She was brought in again, perfectly composed, denying everything. Even when confronted with suspicious transfers, insurance files, and a damning audio recording, she insisted Ryan lied, that the evidence was fabricated. But Brian pressed relentlessly, pointing out contradictions until her veneer cracked. At one moment she hissed, "Remember, I'm not alone. If I go down, many others will burn with me." Those words echoed in Brian's head long after she left. That night, he sat in his office staring at the investigation board, where names, accounts, and dates formed a tangled spider web. At its core, Laura Williams. Next to her name, a bold question mark. Then digital forensics unearthed something explosive: encrypted files pulled from Daniel's laptop. Inside was a disturbing list of life insurance claims where beneficiaries suddenly profited after suspicious deaths. Most were connected to one man, Arthur Wilson, a former branch manager who had disappeared years earlier. Even more damning email traces showed Laura had contacted Arthur just before Adrian's death. Brian drove to Arthur's old workplace. A senior staff member recalled, "Arthur was brilliant, he knew every loophole. But when he left, he started mixing with rich businessmen. They called it investments." I never believed that story. Brian walked away convinced. This wasn't the act of one woman, it was an organized syndicate feeding off orchestrated deaths. That night, Brian's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. A shaky voice whispered, "I worked for Arthur Wilson. I know things you need. Meet me tomorrow 10 a.m. at the cafe near Horton Plaza. Alone. My life's at risk." The line went dead. The next morning, Brian sat at the cafe until a nervous, middle-aged man approached, Henry Cole, once Arthur's staff. His hands trembled as he passed over a flash drive. "This has everything: suspicious policies, transfers, names you wouldn't expect." Before Brian could press further, Henry stiffened. His eyes darted nervously. "Detective, I think we're being followed." Across the street, a black car idled, two shadowy figures inside. Brian stood abruptly. "Come with me. Don't look back." He guided Henry out the rear exit and down a narrow alley. Just as they reached his car, the black sedan swung in, headlights blazing. "Get inside." Brian shoved Henry into the passenger seat, jumped behind the wheel and slammed the accelerator. The sedan followed closely, weaving through traffic. At one point, a motorcycle swerved between them, forcing Brian to jerk the wheel violently. Henry groaned, slamming against the door, his face pale and sweating. "Stay with me, Henry. Guard that flash drive, it's more valuable than either of us." Brian's eyes flicked to him briefly, then locked on the road as he maneuvered through San Diego's crowded streets. Using his tactical driving skills, he finally lost the black sedan in the chaos of downtown traffic. Minutes later, he pulled up at a private hospital. Henry still clutched his stomach, his knuckles white, but there was no gunshot wound, just blunt force trauma. "Hold on, Henry. You need to live to testify," Brian urged as medics rushed to them. Henry's voice rasped, "I'll try. But if I don't make it, make sure that data takes Arthur down." Brian clasped his shoulder firmly. "You have my word." As doctors wheeled Henry inside, Brian stood rigidly outside, the flash drive burning like fire in his pocket. He knew it carried truths powerful enough to topple powerful names. From the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of the black car racing past the hospital before disappearing into the distance. The danger hadn't passed. Clenching his fists, Brian Parker muttered under his breath, "They think they can intimidate us? No, this time we'll be the ones turning the hunt around." The private hospital in central Surabaya buzzed with life that morning. The sterile scent of medicine lingered in the air as doctors hurried down the bright hallways. Inside one ward, Henry Cole rested on the bed, pale but conscious, and four attached to his arm. Brian stood at his side, arms folded tightly. "You're protected here," Brian assured him. "My men are stationed outside. No one gets in without clearance." Henry forced a faint smile despite the pain etched in his face. "I'm not afraid of dying, sir. My only fear is that everything I know will be buried with me." Brian lowered his gaze, then revealed the flash drive. "Don't worry. I've already backed up your files to the department server. Even if anything happens, your truth will survive." Henry shut his eyes briefly, then whispered hoarsely, "Inside those files, you'll see Armin's true trail. He wasn't just tangled with Laura. There are dozens more, families destroyed, sudden deaths, and the money funneled to the rich men around him. They're more than criminals, they're predators feeding on grief." A chill ran down Brian's spine. This wasn't a simple case anymore, it was an industrialized scheme where death itself had been turned into a business. Hours later at the digital forensics lab, Brian and his team unlocked the contents of the flash drive. Hundreds of files unfolded across the screen: policies, transaction logs, beneficiary lists. A chilling pattern emerged: heads of households dead under mysterious circumstances, insurance claims swiftly processed, and money rerouted to accounts tied to Arthur Wilson. But the folder that froze Brian's blood was labeled Project Timur. Inside was a recent file naming Adrian Scott as the next target, stamped with a note: "Execution confirmed. Beneficiary, Laura Williams." Brian's jaw tightened. The puzzle pieces were no longer scattered. This was orchestrated murder. Suddenly, a technician called out, "Sir, there's also an email from Arthur's account, threatening employees who resisted. One of them was sent to Henry." Brian nodded grimly. No wonder Henry had lived in fear. Arthur had long known who could expose him. That evening, Brian returned to the hospital. Henry looked fragile but more stable. His voice cracked as he asked, "Mr. Parker, is the evidence strong enough?" Brian's answer was firm. "More than enough. With this, we can corner Laura and draw Arthur into the open." Tears welled in Henry's eyes. "Then I can finally breathe." But before the moment softened, a nurse stormed in. "Sir, someone's trying to breach the hospital. Claims to be family, no identification." Brian snapped to attention. "Double security. No one enters this ward. If needed, move him to a restricted unit." Later, staring out at the flickering Surabaya skyline, Brian knew Arthur wasn't waiting, he was already moving pieces to erase Henry. This fight had turned lethal. By dawn, police reports confirmed it. An anonymous tip warned of a planned strike near the hospital. "They're getting desperate," Brian muttered, tightening his grip on his phone. Inside the ward, Henry gathered his fading strength. "Don't just protect me. Take the truth public. Let people see who they are." Brian shook his head. "Not yet. If we go public too soon, they'll scatter. We need one clean strike to bring them all down." Then forensics brought another bombshell. A calendar entry for an orchid meeting at a luxury hotel in Darmo, Surabaya, set 3 days away. The guest list, officials, businessmen, all tied to suspicious payouts. Brian knew this was his chance to corner the syndicate, but one mistake could cost him everything. The next day, visiting Henry again, Brian noticed him scribbling weakly in a notebook. The words chilled him. "There's a mole inside the police. Trust no one." Brian whispered urgently, "Do you know who?" Henry shook his head. "I don't know the name. But Arthur has someone feeding him from within." That night, Brian gathered a small circle of trusted allies in a safe house. A board filled with names, photos, and money trails had Arthur Wilson's name circled in red, connecting him to Laura, corrupt officials, and the orchid meeting. "In 3 days they'll all be in one room," Brian told them. A teammate asked nervously, "But if there's a traitor in the force, can we depend on backup?" Brian's voice was resolute. "No, we trust only this team. If word leaks, Arthur will vanish before we act." Thunder cracked over Surabaya that night as rain lashed the windows. Brian stared into the storm and whispered, "Arthur, the fear you've sown will come back for you." The night of the meeting, the 5-star hotel in Darmo gleamed with chandeliers, its driveway lined with luxury cars. Dressed as a financial consultant, Brian blended in, 2 allies disguised as hotel staff beside him. The ballroom buzzed with murmurs, politicians, businessmen, all tied to corrupt networks. The banner read, "Orchid Meeting, Private Session." Moments later, Arthur arrived in a sleek black suit, red tie gleaming. His presence commanded the room. "Tonight," he declared, "we discuss more than insurance. Tonight we build a system that never collapses." Brian's hidden watch camera captured every word. But then his pulse quickened. Across the stage, Commissioner Richard Davis appeared, shaking Arthur's hand. "Relax," Richard whispered. "Our inside lines are secure. No one can touch us." Brian's heart hammered. This was the mole Henry had warned about. Midway through the session, Arthur's eyes fixed on Brian. "You, the new face. Which firm are you from?" The room fell silent. Brian forced a calm smile. "Just a small consultant, sir. I came to learn. I admire your system." Arthur studied him, then smirked. "Good. We like men eager to learn." The tension eased, but Brian knew he'd narrowly escaped suspicion. Later, a guard tapped his shoulder. "Boss wants to see you. Now." In a side room, Arthur and Richard stood waiting. Arthur's stare was sharp. "What's your name?" "Demas," Brian replied under his alias. "Independent consultant, introduced by Mr. Santoso." Arthur circled him. "If you're truly a consultant, tell me, how would you strengthen my system?" Brian didn't flinch. "I'd set up front companies. Funnel the money cleanly. That way no audit could ever track it." Arthur's expression broke into a sly grin. "Smart man." Suddenly, gunfire cracked outside the ballroom. A guard's radio hissed, "Boss. Police are surrounding the hotel." Arthur slammed the table. "Who betrayed us?" Richard's face paled. "It's a trap." Brian seized the moment. "Looks like your trusted circle isn't so airtight after all, Arthur." Before Arthur could react, the door burst open. Armed officers stormed in with blinding flashlights. "Freeze. Nobody move. Chaos erupted. Businessmen scrambled, smashing laptops and burning papers. Arthur dragged Richard toward a hidden stairwell. Brian fought through the frenzy, nearly losing his hidden camera, but broke free. For a brief moment, he saw Arthur vanish into the dark exit. Drenched in sweat, Brian whispered to himself, "This isn't over. I'll follow you into the shadows if I must. But remember, the fight isn't over yet." Brian Parker nodded firmly. "I know. But at least now the evidence is strong enough. This network can't hide anymore." A few hours later, the Surabaya police headquarters was packed. Journalists filled the room, cameras flashing toward the podium. Brian stood beside the police leadership, laying out the truth. A shadowy insurance syndicate controlled by Arthur Wilson, protected by corrupt figures like Commissioner Richard Davis. The revelation sent shockwaves across the nation. News outlets and social media exploded with outrage and relief. Outrage that people had been deceived for years, relief that someone finally dared to uncover it. Yet, as applause echoed, Brian's chest tightened. He knew Arthur wasn't the type to surrender quietly. The man was slippery, always finding gaps to escape. Soon, Arthur's photo appeared on television as the country's most wanted fugitive. For Brian, though, this was only the beginning of another war. That night, Brian found himself on the Kalimas Bridge. The wind cut cold across his face, city lights shimmering over the dark water. He stared at the river flowing beneath him, carrying away countless secrets now dragged into the light. "Truth and justice may crawl slower than lies," he whispered, "but in the end, the guilty always pay." His phone rang. On the other end, Henry Cole's weak but steady voice came through. "Brian, thank you. Without you, I'd be gone already. Don't stop, not until they're finished." Brian allowed a faint smile. "I promise. No matter how deep they hide, I'll hunt them down." He hung up, slipped the phone into his pocket and walked away, his shadow fading into the dim glow of the city. Arthur might still be free. Richard might still have allies. But one thing was certain, the truth had finally surfaced. And once the truth is free, no one can ever cage it again. Reflection and Lessons section. My brothers and sisters, after journeying through the tangled story of Henry, Laura, Arthur, and Brian, surely our hearts are stirred, not only by the suspense, but by the lessons hidden beneath it all. Let us pause, breathe, and reflect. What wisdom can we take from this? First, greed is the root of so much destruction. Arthur and his men were not starving or powerless. They had influence, money, and respect. But their ambition devoured their conscience. They traded lives for wealth that death itself would strip away. From this we learn, when greed rules the heart, ruin soon follows. Second, trust and betrayal walk hand in hand. Henry trusted his wife, yet she betrayed him. Brian trusted his fellow officers, yet found corruption in their ranks. Life is full of such risks. Even those close to us can sometimes strike from behind. The lesson is not suspicion but wisdom, to give trust only where it's truly deserved. Third, perseverance and courage are pillars of truth. Imagine if Brian had given up halfway, if fear of Arthur or discovery of a traitor in the force had silenced him. The truth would have remained buried. Real courage is not the absence of fear, but the strength to move forward despite it. And though we may not face crime syndicates, our battles, financial hardships, broken families, heavy responsibilities, require the same endurance. Fourth, false freedom is never freedom at all. Laura claimed she acted to escape the cage of her marriage. But the road she chose only led her into darker prisons. Guilt, shame, and cold prison walls. From this, we are reminded, when life feels suffocating, the answer is not deceit or destruction. Seek the right way, speak honestly with your loved ones, ask guidance from those you trust, draw closer to God. Fifth, the story awakens us to the worth of law and justice. We've all seen cases where power or money seem to silence truth. But this tale gives hope. As long as there are people like Brian, officers, judges, journalists, even ordinary citizens who refuse to be silent, justice will never die. It may walk slowly, but it always arrives. Sixth, the story speaks of family and love. Henry lost his life because of his devotion to a wife who didn't return his sincerity. How often do we neglect those closest to us? In chasing wealth or success, we forget the priceless treasure of family. Let this remind us. Don't wait until loss teaches the lesson. Appreciate your loved ones now. Seventh, we are shown the power of prayer and hope. Even at death's edge, Henry still planted a seed of hope in Brian's heart, that the truth would surface. That seed grew into determination, lighting the way forward. In our own lives, storms may rise and plans may collapse, but prayer and hope keep us standing. My brothers and sisters, in this modern age, temptations surround us. Quick riches, instant pleasures, fleeting power. But what do they mean if gained the wrong way? A peaceful life, though simple, is far more precious. Guard these 3 treasures in your heart. Honesty, so we may rest at night without fear. Loyalty, for without it, love and friendship are hollow. Courage, so we may face whatever trials life sends. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, is there a part of your life drifting from the right path? Is there a small root of greed quietly growing within? So, cut it now before it burns away everything you love. And finally, let this story stand as both warning and guide. The world will always be filled with deceit, but we must not be swept away. Hold on tightly to honesty, family, and faith. In the end, it is not wealth nor status, but a clean heart and meaningful life that bring true joy. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If it touched your heart, share it with others, so more may learn before it's too late. May every step you take be blessed with peace, strength, and health. And always remember, truth may stumble, but it never dies.